Hello. um, so this is a re-record. I had initially recorded a video for Genesis 3, but um, I went astray. I would say some of the things I was saying would have been flagged by YouTube. Not that it was anything outrageous, it's just certain things you can't say on YouTube. So let's try this again. Genesis 3 1. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden. Okay, so this is where I'm a little bit confused. Because in earlier chapters, I believe God created animals before man. So does the serpent have more lived experience? Like, these creatures were not necessarily created ignorant. So are they more aware, or do they have a different perspective, um similar to say the angels, even though the angels were designed by God to assist with man? Or I shouldn't say that, because we haven't gotten to that part of the Bible, but from what I've been told and from my understanding, that's where the conflict happened with Lucifer and his descent from God, because of the relationship dynamics between God and man, and then man and the angels. So again, is there something that the serpent knows that we don't know? Especially because there's communication here. And obviously now, I mean, there are people who are snake charmers, but what type of communication is that? Versus here, where there's an actual interaction here, where there's clear understanding. So I don't know. I just find it interesting in the earlier stages, right? That you have a clear line of communication. You have a clear line of communication with God, and you can speak to animals. So again, if these animals are conscious, it kind of makes it. Wouldn't that make it awkward to eat them? To kill and eat them? I don't know. I don't know. And when did that start? Like, I see the way I myself am not particularly an animal person, but I respect them and their right to life. Am I wanting to bring them into the house? Well, I understand a cat, because a cat serves a purpose in the sense of pest control. I guess a dog for security, but even still, it's like I'd like them to. Okay, I'm getting off track. Uh, I'm getting off track. And he said to the woman, God had indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden. 2. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden. Okay. 3. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Okay. So if someone can remember from earlier, did God deliver instructions to Adam and Eve, or was that instruction delivered to Adam and then relayed to Eve? Like, I want to know, does she understand maybe not necessarily the magnitude of her choice or the consequences of her actions, um but does she have a clear understanding of the directive? um and the thing is, even though it's been communicated, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Has there been death in the garden? Because if something is a foreign concept, you might as well be speaking another language. If I don't know what that means, if I've never experienced it, and you haven't communicated the magnitude of the consequences, is that fair to hold somebody to the standard of punishment that we're going to see further down the line? 4. Then the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die." 5. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. See, again, I'm going to probably repeat this a lot, but there was a lady who said she read the Bible cover to cover, and she thought it was a load of BS because um and somebody told her that you're reading it looking for yourself in the Bible. You're not reading it looking for God. So I'm trying to get into that headspace to see what some omniscient, all-knowing, all-loving, and maybe those are not the characteristics of God that we need to think of. But if we're made in the image of God, should I be thinking, is it wrong for me to see myself? Or is it that, or should I use the standard that I would measure God by? I think that's where I'm confused, especially on my journey, because my main goal is not to know God, it's to understand God, to become familiar with the text and the teachings and my interpretation in order to better hone my moral compass, I guess. I don't know. But so I think that's where the confusion I have lies with what does it mean to be like God? And they're saying specifically in this context, knowing good and evil. What does it mean to know? Right? Is it to know as in to understand, to be awareness, or is it just in awareness, or is it just to recognize? And in this circumstance, does that mean that they had been living up until this point where I would say it's almost like a childlike state? You may feel something, you may experience something, but not know how to recognize it as good and evil, even though you've experienced it. So is that what they mean to know good and evil, where it moves into your consciousness and you're actually able to perceive it? And then to know something, are you knowing it objectively or subjectively? Right? Because when the punishment is dished out, I have a hard time wrestling with it, because to me there's this. Okay, objectively, did I disobey a commandment? Did I disobey an order? Yes. So in that sense, am I objectively wrong, or am I subjectively wrong? Because am I entitled to know good and evil if I'm experiencing it and affecting me? Because in that sense, like if you think of Black Mirror, right? You say these are prototypes, right? Or the first iteration of a design, and they're um out in reality. Um, does does that mean that these people are just like simulations, or like, I might be dating myself, but you remember the Sims game? Is that it, or is it like a video game? Like, if you're not aware of your, if you're not aware of your experience, are you just are you just a passenger, like an empty vessel or tool for God? And some people don't have a problem with that idea. But when they say, did God gave you free will? Did God give you free will? Like, if you're being used as a vessel for God, is that free will? If you can't if you can't process your decisions, if you don't have access to all the information to to make the best decisions, then is that fair? Is that free will? Or are you just reacting, right? Because you may have a certain goal, you might want a certain outcome, and if you had more inputs, you would make better decisions, right? Like, would Eve have eaten the apple if she knew she was gonna curse her entire bloodline for generations and generations? Like, if she knew the consequences, would she have done that? So you're saying, oh, I have free will because I made the choice, but you told me one agreement. So if you told me I was gonna die from eating the apple, and I'm anticipating death, but then you change the punishment, is that free will? Because I might have made a different decision. You baited me with one decision, where you baited me with one consequence, and then gave me another. So how is that fair? To And this is something that I've grappled with in terms of organized religion. Like, if you're saying that there's a certain code of conduct that I should live by, right? At what point do you uphold your end of the agreement as this grand entity that I'm putting my faith in, right? I feel like there should be a certain relationship, but I mean, who am I to question God, right? 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. So again, context. Context, right? Um, so was Adam there the whole time? Did he hear the serpent? Was I'm assuming the serpent was an actual physical manifestation in the real world. She wasn't like hallucinating while Adam was there, right? Like, like when you think about, if you have like demonic possession or urges, or if you're schizophrenic and you're hearing voices that are outside yourself. So we're just going to be clear that that's not what this is. Like, it was a literal conversation. And the way this is written, it doesn't seem like there was any hesitation on Adam's end. So then, if he required no convincing. What does that say about him? And the way I've always heard the story, um, um, the way I always heard the story uh, interpreted was that she she was being very aggressive in her persuasion, not necessarily physically aggressive, but like manipulative and pressuring, and um the temptation, like Adam just succumbed to the temptation. But this is not what that's saying. And you're seeing her reasoning, right? What is the standard she's using? It must be comparable to other things in the garden. So what does that mean? Because she disobeyed a commandment using her own rational thought or critical thinking, women for generations should be condemned to subservience and male intellect, simply because simply for disobeying, right? And then, but then, but but then when we look at our society, questioning and disobedience is not always a bad thing, right? What's the point of debates or forums or or resisting oppression, or um, like, just because somebody has put in place a standard or a system doesn't mean you need to adhere to it, especially when you think of education and science, or even how people learn. I think questioning is healthy. Now, I would say maybe where she made the mistake was maybe she should have had that conversation with God and asked those questions to get more clarity. But we don't know that she didn't do that. I mean, it's, again, like, even though the book is so long, it's like, when you think of the story of your life, how many details are missed, even by you living it and experiencing it. So I think those are crucial elements to further understand such a lofty decision. 7. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. So, something that I often say is, um, I feel like, right in this day and age, we are in the garden. Like, not necessarily the literal Garden of Eden, because based on geography, it may have actually been a real place on this earth. But in the sense that we're living in a very Black Mirror world. Everything has a camera, everything has a microphone. There are the things that we choose to share and the things that we don't. And everybody's under a microscope 24/7. And we've seen and heard of all sorts of debauchery and evil. And in this sense, when they say, then the eyes of both of them were opened. So I'm curious to know in what sense. Again, was it awareness? Are you self-aware, in the sense? well, clearly they are, but do they mean like, well, again, it's implied that literally naked, but what does that mean? Why should you feel self-conscious about your body if you've always been naked? Is there something that you've been experiencing with your body that you feel like you need to protect it and cover it? So eating the apple means you know good and you know evil, right? And you think of modern times, why do we cover our private parts? What does that mean? Adam had surgery performed on him while he was out sleeping. What else was going on? Like, can you imagine if like we think Eden was a paradise, but it was actually some sort of hell, like some sort of lab experiment? Like I know that's wild to think, but even thinking about like our current world, like even if you like want to be free and you want to be like naked and be yourself, what if you were aware of who's on the other end of the camera? Would you still behave the same way that you do? Would it drive you mad until you just are forced to get used to it? Like how do you expect someone to react even if it were your parents? Like, I understand like the parent and child relationship, but at some point you want independence and you want privacy, and there's just some things you don't you don't necessarily want your parents to see, even if it's not that you're doing anything wrong, um, or anything bad. Like, just imagine, right? You're like 15, 30. Do you really want your opposite gender or even your same gender parent like watching you shower? Not really, right? So I don't I don't get why this would be strange, but there's something about like the whole nakedness thing, because further down the line, I can't remember who it was, but there was a person who was lying there naked and their kid walks in on them. And the kid is startled, and then they go tell their siblings. And the siblings come in, they cover their eyes, and they cover their parent. But then their parent curses the one who spoke. But the thing is like some things are some things are alarming. Some things are alarming, and some things are a knee jerk reaction, and some things you might not know how to process. Like, I get that it's your parent, but it might have still been a traumatic experience, and that person who saw their parent, they were living in a world of sin. So imagine if you had experienced some sort of trauma and then you walk in and then you see your parent like that, and then your reaction, you told your siblings. It's not like you told the neighborhood. Like, you kept it in within like the confinement of these walls, right? So, but okay, but we'll get to that. You'll get to that. We'll get to that story later. But you see like how but you see the significance of nakedness. Like, you see where I'm going with that. 8. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. So the thing that I'm curious about is this awakening that Adam and Eve experienced. Like, did they have an awareness that we don't have? Like, especially if they're seeing a physical manifestation of God. And is it that they're seeing a physical manifestation of God, or is Lord God Jesus? Like, that's something that I wonder, and maybe we'll figure it out down the line, because they're saying walking, right? So I feel like it would be a physical representation. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know. Um and they hid themselves. So did they hide together or did they hide separately? I'm assuming they hid together. So they were united on that front. And why to hide themselves? It seems reactionary. It seems fearful. And I hear a lot of Christians or religious people in general saying like, "Oh, I'm a God-fearing person, or I want a God-fearing partner." So that's this. They're fearful, whereas before that wasn't the case. So why do you want to fear God now? Are you fearing God's wrath? And if that's the case, so you understand he's capable of aggression or violence, or even maybe toxicity is too subjective, but causing you harm, right? Like, you often hear people say, "Oh, what would you rather have, be feared or loved?" So, oh, what does it mean to invoke fear in someone? Has he done something, or is it just the sheer magnitude and awe of what, who and what God is? And what was that awakening experience like? Like, were Adam and Eve like pure? Were they actually free of sin up until they ate the apple? Or was everything forgivable except that, because it was a specific commandment? So we think of the 10 commandments and you hear about the 7 deadly sins. And I'm curious to know if there's an actual hierarchy of sin. Um, but yeah, then 9, then the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, "Where are you?" So then, so he's calling for Adam, and it's a lowercase u. So we're assuming, so he's speaking to man. Because I've seen you capitalized before. And is he, I'm assuming because they said called to Adam. I mean, it could still mean you as a collective, but 10. So he said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself." So is it because Adam is, what does it mean to be naked? Because they fashion clothes at this point. So what does that mean? Or is it that they can't keep the clothes on? Or is it that they're always naked in the eyes of God? Like that they created these clothes in vain? What does nakedness mean? And you hid yourself. Did you know that you had the capacity to hide from God? Or again, was it another a vain attempt, in the sense where I want you out of my sight? not necessarily to be out of your sight. 11. And he said, "Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat?" It's one of those things where, to me, the power dynamics here, I don't like it. I understand that it's God, right? Even if it were parent child, I think it would depend on the age where I would get uncomfortable. I mean, I'll think that one over further, right? Maybe in what context, but again, it's a situation where I guess I have to be objective because I can see how my interpretation could be defensive, but it's in the sense where it's like I'm trying to empathize as a man, and um because I feel like I understand their train of thought. um so have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat? So are you asking me questions that you do not know, or are you genuinely asking me? Like, am I clearly showing signs that, well, obviously, I'm showing signs that something's different, right? But is it something in the statement? And then, if we're naked, is God naked? Is that why they recognize that they were naked, right? Because if you have clothes and I'm sitting here walking around naked, and it's like something that I've never really thought about as a big deal, then all of a sudden I start asking myself, well, what's different here? And so then he says, um, 12. Then the man said, "The woman who you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree and I ate." And this, again, I don't like this because, again, but I can see why. I can see why Adam is being defensive, but he's deflecting all the blame elsewhere. Like, he did say that he ate it, but I feel like he's not taking accountability. And then, so he's placing the blame on God and he's placing the blame on Eve. And at this point, is he protecting the serpent if he was there, or does he not know of the serpent at all? And then, but you can really see the division in their relationship and the othering, right? Because it's like, even though Eve is literally a part of him, it's like, well, you created her, you brought her here, and this is what she did, and this is how she tempted me. So maybe understanding this from a different perspective, maybe Eve's is having to be subservient is less to do with Eve and everything to do with Adam. Because if God's logic was, I gave this person to you to be your partner, and clearly you've betrayed them. So what does it mean for you to take full responsibility of the situation? Because now you can't blame her. Now you can't. Like, if you're in a marriage and you're the head of the household, even if she goes astray, you're responsible for her and her decisions as her being a part of you. So what does that mean? Like, if this is a group project, right? And I think I may be onto something here, right? But if you're thinking about this as if this is a group project, but somebody is designated as a leader, there's many different styles of leadership. You can lead as a hierarchy, right? Where at the end of the day, you make the final decision, but you don't need to be like, you can be a leader. You don't need to be a boss. Like, you don't need to oppress the people beneath you, right? You can inspire the best out of people who are, say, lower on the totem pole, right? And value the opinions, all the opinions of those in your collective. You can the thing that I've learned in project management is, even though you're the leader, you don't need to be the expert. Your job is to manage experts, right? So can you enable people to be the best that they can be? Because what is your goal? If your goal is just to be the boss and just to maintain control, that is a very different that's a very different set of goals and a very different set of leadership skills that you would use, as opposed to if you looked at it project by project, or a project by project with an overarching goal, right? So, like, take this for example, right? If we're thinking about male and female relationships, right? Sometimes you'll find, I'll speak from the female perspective. Sometimes you'll find that there are women who are so focused on the what's the word, benchmarks, I think that's the word, where it's like, oh, I just want to get married. I just want to get married, right? So it's not about the marriage. It's about the act of getting married. So the wedding is the big thing. So they ignore all the red flags, and sometimes they ignore green flags, right? That might have got them a more successful marriage, simply because the goal was to get married, right? So I think if I'm putting on my God hat, maybe that's where God was going, right? And maybe that is the lesson of men. That's a lesson for men in how they relate to women in male and female relationships. Yes, God gave you this woman to you, but if you don't want to be a partner, then you're going to learn how to be a leader, which in turn should make you a better partner, right? Because partnership is give and take. Sometimes even if somebody else is the leader, you have to learn when to take initiative and when to fall back, right? So when they say women should be submissive, right? I don't think that's across the board when you think of submission, because in that circumstance, if you remove any autonomy, any sovereignty, any self-determination, you're going to die. Like, you're going to die, worst case scenario, and you're definitely going to be abused. Even look at animals in nature, right? You need to know when to fight tooth and nail and when it's best to surrender. Because sometimes your goal is self-preservation, right? And you don't want it to get to that point, right? So you have to be proactively submissive as opposed to reactively submissive. um 13. And the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." So here, Eve is passively admitting she influenced Adam, but her main focus is again deflection and not taking accountability of her actions. She said she ate it, but she said the serpent deceived me, right? And at this point, did the serpent deceive you? At this point, you didn't die, right? So, in terms of that, like the serpent addressing your underlying concerns, you didn't die. So the serpent didn't lie to you. Not yet, at least. Like, um, and again, in the nature of the language, again, was it, um, one thing we didn't consider is God said to Adam and Eve, "You should not eat it." How does the serpent know that you're not going to die? How did the serpent know that you get knowledge of God? Has had the serpent eaten the apple before? And then what does that mean? So if they've had knowledge, if they have knowledge, because they're saying that this is the most knowledgeable creature in the garden, right? How did they get that knowledge? If they got it from the apple, what does that interaction with the apple know? What does that interaction with the apple cause the serpent to know? And did the serpent foresee their punishment or their consequences? Because they haven't been punished yet. And then have they tried to convince other creatures to eat this apple? Was it one individual serpent who ate the apple? Or did all of the serpents eat the apple? So at this point, are the serpents a superior species? I know that's weird to think about, but so I mean, as mentioned, so I mean, the serpent didn't lie, and maybe as far as the serpent's awareness, the serpent's intention wasn't to lie, right? Or was the serpent being manipulative to test a theory? Maybe the serpent had been told, "Don't eat it," and they wanted to see the consequence. So they took somebody who's more risk tolerant or easier to manipulate, and they tested the theory. Um, 14. So the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life." See, the thing is, Adam is made of dust. What does that mean? Right? The serpent to this day in this day and age eats flesh. Some of them can even eat people. And when they say you are cursed more than cattle, have the other animals done things And that is why God gave the newest creation dominion over them. And if that's the case, is there another iteration that has dominion over us that we don't know? Mm, yeah. And then on your belly you shall go. Now, when you think about it, when we're babies, we crawl, right? And sometimes when you think about it, like how you sleep, is that whole point empathy for the serpent? And then when you think about it, why do men have swimmers or sperm, right? That's kind of snake like. And then that comes out of a phallus, which is snake like. A part of me feels like I see how people say it's a metaphor for adult relations. Um, but my argument has been that the original sin wasn't intercourse, that it was relational assault, I guess, or relational battery. Um, and the reason why an Adam has an Adam's apple is because he had to swallow his words. Like, there's evidence that he ate it. So, what does that mean? Like, why would there be a literal reminder of the apple? And when does it develop? Right? Because it's not like, as far as I'm aware, it's not like little boys have Adam's apples. So I feel like that's a representation of the sin of man. So maybe the order is different. Maybe Adam ate it first, but then the punishment for Eve, I'm still trying to understand. I am trying to understand. Because if the serpent is trying to talk to you, if the serpent is trying to manipulate you, if the serpent is trying to make you go against your better interest, when you think of like snake charmers, because she's saying she had a conversation with the snake, but this book was written by man. But she said she ate from the apple and that Adam was with her and she gave it to him. What does that mean? I feel like there's something there, and it has to do somehow with how men and women relate to each other. 15, and I will put enmity between you and the woman. So I think I googled what that meant before. Enmity, I think it's like hostility or conflict, like the inability to get along. Yeah, active opposition or hostility. Yeah. and between your seed and her seed. And in this particular text, the seed is lowercase on his on the serpent side. Or see, I'm assuming this conversation is still going on with the serpent and he's not referring to Adam. But if the serpent is attached to Adam, does that mean that they have two seeds, right? You know how sometimes people say, like, oh, I am my mother's daughter, or I am my father's daughter. Is like some of the internal conflict we experience because of our parental conflict. Like maybe the unification process is not as harmonious. Like we tend to think of people in terms of like dichotomy, like are you left brain or right brain? Obviously you have both. What does it mean to be masculine and feminine? Well, again, when you think about sex and gender, like the things we ascribe to femininity versus the things we ascribe to masculinity, right? Are there some things inherently that belong to each gender? Or is it like a matrix where there are things that inherently belong to each gender, but then characteristics that you inherit from each parent that get attributed to each gender, right? Like I've heard some men say, particularly with respect to black men who have single mothers, like, oh, you're more emotional and aggressive because you inherited that from your mother. Like she's emotional, so you're aggressive because aggression is like the male trait. But all in all, you're unable to regulate your emotions. Like, is that where they're going with respect to the challenges with the seed or the opposition between you and the seed? Or yeah, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his seed. Oh, and you shall bruise his heel. And then the his is capitalized in both cases. So again, is it God? Is it Adam? Is it the serpent? Who are they talking about? Who? And what does it mean to bruise the head? And what does it mean to bruise the heel? When I think about heel, I think about it like in terms of foot, and I think about it in terms of movement. But to bruise your head, is it like this? Where your head hurts just from thinking or ideas? Like emotional trauma, mental trauma? Or is it actual violence? Or is it the head of the phallus? And then what does that mean? 16. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow. and your conception. So then what does sorrow mean? Is it purely emotional or is it pain? A feeling of deep distress caused by loss, disappointment, or other misfortunes suffered by oneself or others. Feel or display deep distress. So you're going to be a poor, unfortunate soul. And your conception. See, so there must be more in terms of. Dang it, that's not what I wanted to do. Um, so that's not directly correlated to pain in childbirth. Because it sounds like, because it could mean increasing the fertility. Like maybe, maybe Eve only had a kid once every like 5 years, and now it's like, oh, you have the possibility of having it one every 9 months. Conception. Okay. The action of conceiving a child or of one being conceived, the forming or devising of a plan or idea. Ooh, wait. If you look at it from the idea sense, what if it's because she has to be subservient to her husband? What if he's saying, I'm going to make you depressed because you're going to be a free thinker and you're going to be subservient? Almost like it's like I'm gonna make you even smarter. So you gotta deal with his stupidity. Because that is hell. That is hell. Like, again, I don't wanna remove autonomy from her. But let's go back to sorrow and look at it from the idea sense. Um, a feeling of deep distress caused by loss. Okay. Oh yeah, you're gonna feel loss because you're losing freedom right now. You're gonna feel disappointment because you're experiencing that loss. Like you may have been happy from whatever knowledge you gained, but again, you're gonna experience a loss and you're gonna be misfortunate. What does that mean? Misfortunate. Maybe it's in relation to the new circumstances, right? Because to me, when you say that, when you say that your husband shall rule over you, and you say, well, it hasn't been stated here, but people always say God gave us free will. Right here, that doesn't sound like this. That's not free will. You've put a constraint on me. Then and there, you've set parameters for my life. That is not free will, right? So then, what standard am I bound to in terms of sin? And if we're talking about pain in pain in childbirth, because like, why would he say that twice? When to multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. So maybe she didn't. So if she didn't experience pain before, right? How can you multiply no pain? No pain would be ecstasy. Like if you felt nothing, well, like nothing multiplied by nothing is nothing. There would be no change. But if you're saying multiply, okay, well, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. So again, you're gonna make it painful, and your conception, right? So that means like, are you gonna make this man insatiable? Because it's saying the action of conceiving a child for conception. So yeah, you're gonna make him more eager. So, because they're saying the action of conceiving a child or of one being conceived. So then maybe this is also talking about multiple births, right? So twins, triplets, or whatever, like a dog. You're just gonna give birth to a whole litter at once. It says, "Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." So does it mean your desire in the sense like you, you do what he wants? Like it's not your desire, it's his desire for you. Or is it in the sense like you'll want him more and he shall rule over you? Like, you know how there's some women who are very male centered? Is that what that means for them? Like, you're just you're driven by the validation of men and that consumes you. That's your motivation, like to serve your man. Or your desire shall be for your husband. Like, do you love him more? Whereas he rules you? And again, I feel like it's the transfer of responsibility, and he shall rule over you. What does that mean with in relation to God? Right? Oh, because I listened to the serpent. Now Adam is my leader. But what if we have another conversation, right? And maybe this is why they say women shouldn't teach the Bible, because is he saying in this sense like you're not gonna receive revelation? Well, no, because he's not saying I'm not communicating with you. He's not saying that, right? And he's still clearly talking to the serpent, and he can still apply consequences to the serpent, even though man at this point has dominion over them. So I'm just curious to know what a woman's relationship is supposed to be with God now in this context, right? And then thinking of it in terms of an unmarried woman, what does that mean? It says, "Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." So, is being husbandless or childless necessarily a bad thing? Because in this context, just from this verse, right? I'm not saying as a whole, and we'll get there later. We'll see what like the value of children is. Um, in this context, it sounds like it's a punishment. Like it's a punishment to when you bring that child into the world, you are being punished because I did not make it easy for you. And then again, if we're looking at conception in terms of idea, conceptualizing an idea, if you're single and free, are you being punished? Because here it says your husband, and he shall rule over you. But if you don't have one, then hey, are you in the clear? You know, I believe it's the Quakers who believe that having kids is a sin. So, okay, 17. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Again, is it a generational thing? And then what does that mean? Because again, like right now, like the biggest problem we have in society, well, not the biggest problem, but a big problem, especially in the West, is gluttony. Well, maybe not necessarily gluttony, because you have an obesity problem, but you can be malnourished and obese. I mean, if you look at it, the definition of the word is in mal is in bad, so bad nourishment or poorly nourished, right? And again, because you've heeded the voice of your wife, but notice how he said voice and not word. The words of your wife. And because he didn't say listen either. Right? So because you can make a sound with no words. And if he was using that as a motivation, because sometimes people hear you and they're not listening. So because you paid attention to, you took notice of, paid attention to her voice. Okay. But attention is not necessarily the same as listen. Because for me, listening implies understanding or processing, whereas attention is just to me is awareness. Right? But and have eaten from the tree which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground. For your sake. Because he's saying, I'm doing this for you. Why? How? Somebody explain to me how cursing the ground for him. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Because before I thought you'd have to be a steward of the that's what you have to be a steward of the land. But maybe this is what it means to be a steward of because he actually has to work the land. But toil to me implies like struggle, hard labor. Yeah, work extremely hard or incessantly. What does that mean? Because what does it mean? Because I feel something has to do with it. Like something came too easy to Adam that he's not appreciating, and that's why he'll have to earn things now. So what does that mean? Heart, in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. So again, did that just apply to Adam, or did it apply to others? Because as we see in the next chapter, Cain Cain had a lot of success when it came to agriculture, but is it just because he was a really hard worker, or was he blessed, or does he not have the same challenges as Adam? Because from where it stands today, Eve has a generational curse, but does Adam? So cursed is the ground for your sake. Why would I? Why would somebody curse the ground? Curse. So does it mean to be like alive on this earth? Like the ground is cursed? What does that mean? And then when you think of the snake is consistently on the ground. I don't know. 18. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. So maybe it's a metaphor. Like if Adam committed violent relations on Eve, it sounds like you're really going to have to wrestle to survive. Like part of me believes like yes, some of this has to do with Eve, but I think something in the way God's punishing Adam, it's almost like because Eve is a part of you, like when she feels pain, you'd think in theory that he should too, right? So what does it mean for him to take accountability for his family? Because like the way I would see a man might perceive this is almost like Eve is supposed to be the easiest thing in his life because you've been commanded to mm, well, your desire shall be for your husband and he shall rule over you. Yeah. So it sounds like that's the relationship now. Like not you're not necessarily partners and you have to do what he wants. But at the end of the day, he's he's gonna have his own challenges. It seems here there's gender roles now in the sense Eve will bring forth children, whereas before during creation Eve was a part of Adam. So that's changed. So in theory, he's taken the power of creation away from Adam. Or mm, mm, no. Is there something Adam knows that she doesn't know? Because again, so Adam is a part of the creative process, and that's been shifted to Eve. But Adam still contributes. So Adam still has relations with Eve. Assuming like before it was in violence. What does that mean? Right? Because then if you think of conception, what does it mean for a child to be born of love versus born of hate or born of sin or born of violence? To be born of pain. And there's different kinds of pain, right? Because then there's the pain of sacrifice or altruism, and then there's the pain of obligation. Like right now, children, it doesn't sound like the whole relationship. Everything sounds really negative, right? But I mean, I can see how you can make it positive, but you'd have to choose. You'd have to choose and work hard at it because the language is very negative. I mean, it's a relationship in the sense that it's an interaction, but when you think of like love, that's not what this is, right? So then you think of like the initial creation, like he made her because you were lonely. But then what does it mean? Because there's like, bring God in your relationship, bring God into your relationship. Well, if this is him setting the parameters of the relationship, this sounds like hell. Why would you want to ascribe to this? Right? I mean, there's some lessons that could be learned here in terms of like forgiveness and communication, but it's creating an environment of resentment, anger, and frustration. Like at first glance, that would be my initial reaction. Like if I were thinking like, oh, I'm Eve, I'd be really upset. I'd be really frustrated. I'd probably pull away. But then if I didn't have a choice, I would be withdrawn. Like it would just be performative, right? And I think that's where the sorrow comes in, right? Because you're depressed, you're trapped, right? And it's like, how do I get into a point? How do I get to a point where this doesn't feel like a life sentence, right? I feel like it completely changes the nature of the relationship, right? So how do you not allow these parameters to impact you? And I think it's about having the right partner and being able to communicate. to communicate your concerns, your fears, to strategize. Like I definitely feel like it would be somewhere where you'd have to lean to lean in more and I guess have faith. Because at this point, it's like, okay, I understand, may not understand God, but I know God's power, right? I know maybe not the rationale, right? But I know this person has the power to impact my life. And then, so then, what would it mean to have faith in God? What would it mean to have faith in Adam as a partner, right? Because again, like feeling a bit betrayed, but in theory, she betrayed the serpent, right? But if it was in the case of abuse, should she have kept quiet? Because there's some things in the Bible where I'm just like, okay, make that make sense, right? Like in this case of Cain and Abel, where God is saying, like, Cain, you're going to be branded, and at some point, somebody's going to deal with you. And that person who deals with you, they're going to be cursed. Even though they're like, God is leaving it open ended in the sense, like, well, whoever comes across you is going to deal with you. But I mean, if you're that person, so then I guess this is where you'd have to exercise forgiveness, right? And what does that look like? Because you didn't die. So did God forgive you and set boundaries or consequences or punishment? And if it's a generational curse, is that forgiveness? Right? So then if you don't have somebody to model that for you, if it's a foreign concept, how do you just inherently do that? Because I feel like that's what's going to need to happen, because I feel like Adam is going to have to forgive Eve, like saying that he didn't abuse, saying that he didn't abuse her or anything like that. Adam has to forgive Eve for leading him astray, and Eve has to forgive Adam for snitching, right? Because now that's her master. 19. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So then, does dust make dust then? And so then I get the herb of the field, so grass or wheat. So it's not, does wheat have fruit? I don't know. Grains, fruit, seeds. Well, I know seeds. They might have flowers, but I I don't know. I'm not an agricultural person. I don't know. Um, but you need that to make bread. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. But sweat is not the same as yeast. Or is there something else that yeast? You know what? I don't even want to go there. But till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So maybe the serpent did lie. Maybe that's the death sentence. But then the serpent eats the dust. But then the serpent returns to the dust too. And the serpent is constantly shedding and returning and going into the dust. For out of the ground you were taken. Taken. What does that mean? Robbed? Like if I take something, it means you're like, okay, like removed, but it's saying like when I think taken, I think of belonging. So it's like you belong somewhere. And and the notion of returning, like I'm giving you back, like I'm putting you back where you belong. So is that like almost like saying you're a failure of a creation? Because for dust you are. So is it saying that because I animated you, like because it's saying the ground cursed is the ground for your sake, but you are the ground based on this language. So they're saying I'm doing this for you. Maybe in the sense like you don't want to live like this forever. Maybe that's the point of death. 20. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. I thought her name was Eve before that. Did he see it to come, or that was just foreshadowing? Or because she had given birth before, but now it's changed? So is there something special about those kids before, or are they cursed too? Because he says, because she was the mother of all living, not because she is. So what does that mean? Does it have to do with God's relationship with creation? 21. Also for Adam and his wife, the Lord God made tunics of skin and clothed them. Is it in the sense that, like, before they were souls? Like, I think about like, if they were actually like spirit, like they can still interact. Well, because we know some animals see like different spectrums or whatever, and then he made like literal like meat suits, like literal skin, and so maybe they were naked in a different sense, or maybe they're just talking about skin of animals. Who knows? 22. Then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. Like one of us? Who is us? Is this Jesus? Is there saying the Lord God? A man of noble rank or high office. act in a superior, domineering manner towards confer the title of Lord upon. He's, so then maybe it's a rank of God. Maybe there's levels to being God. Like if you think of it in terms of birth order, maybe, or who knows. And now, lest he put on his hand, or lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Am I missing something? Because they're saying that he's gonna die with the intention of preventing to avoid the risk of. He put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. What does that mean? Preventing. That's the thing. So if everybody else knew of good and evil, maybe they're talking about it in terms of ignorance is bliss. Like, how do we know that this dynamic didn't already exist, but God is just explaining it now? Like, bringing it into the awareness. 23. Therefore, the Lord God sent him out of the garden to till the ground from which he was taken. And that confuses me. Because what does that mean? Like, was the Garden of Eden like, was it like a reservation? You know, like when we think of, let's say in Canada, where they put the indigenous people on reservations, like here's your area of land, but worse because this is, well, I shouldn't say worse, but like you're in like a petri dish for observation. But now you're removed to do what? And the thing is, if he was taken from land from outside and brought inside, does does that make you worldly? Does that make you different? Does that make you like a parasite or a foreign body? Like when you think of transplants, like I'm just curious if the project was doomed to fail from the beginning. 24. So he drove out the man, and he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. So, okay, he drove out the man. So is Eve still inside? And he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Is it just that he drove out Adam, or is it that like he drove Adam out and Eve had no choice but to follow? Is it that he separated them and that they have a separate story? Why was it just at the east of Eden? Is it gated? Like it's very clear that it's being been guarded, but why at one entry point? You can't get in from the other side. So then again, it sounds like there was a physical boundary to this place. So then it makes me question, like, what is outside? But I don't know. I don't know. That took a really long time, but yeah, that's Genesis 3. Um, yeah, let me know what you think. If you agree with my interpretation, if you disagree, like I want to know. I want to know. I'm curious what other perspectives, what other backgrounds, what insight can be brought into the interpretation of the Bible.